He was once the most feared man in Italy, a warrior king who brought emperors to their knees and ruled an empire of Goths and Romans alike. His name was Theoderic. But in his final days, the mighty king was not celebrated with glory. He was haunted, by betrayal, by guilt, by visions of demons clawing at his soul. This was no ordinary death. This was the slow unraveling of a man who built kingdoms, only to die in terror of eternal damnation. Tonight, we step into the shadows of Ravenna, to witness the last, dreadful days of Theoderic, king of the Ostrogoths. Most will hear this story and turn away, just as they turned away from the king when death came for him. But you're still here. That makes you different. Prove it, subscribe now. If not, walk away and join the ones who choose to forget. By the turn of the 520s, Theoderic the Great, king of the Ostrogoths, had ruled Italy for nearly 3 decades. His reign was marked by peace, by architectural beauty, by an uneasy but functional balance, Goths as warriors, Romans as administrators, Arians and Orthodox Christians coexisting. But like all great empires, cracks were forming, small at first, then widening fast. First, succession. Theoderic had no living sons. His heir by blood was his daughter's son, Athalaric, still a boy. His daughter, Amalasuntha, was competent and learned, but the Gothic tradition had no precedent of female rule. Could a boy king, under regency, hold together a fractious kingdom? Second, religious tension. Theoderic was Arian, the bulk of his Roman subjects were Orthodox, Catholic. There was always tension, the policy of toleration had held, but the new Eastern Roman Emperor Justin I intensified persecutions of Arians in the East. Theoderic saw this as a threat, a challenge to his authority and religious identity. Third, alleged conspiracies among the Roman elite. 2 of the most respected Roman noblemen in Theoderic's court, Boethius, advisor, philosopher, statesman, and Symmachus, consul, came under suspicion. They were accused of communicating with the Eastern court, perhaps of plotting to undermine Theoderic. Whether true or not, these accusations fed Theoderic's growing fear, that his court was full of snakes. Fourth, diplomatic isolation. Some Gothic and Vandal alliances were fraying. Theoderic had married his heir Eutharic to a daughter of the Eastern Roman court in hopes of strengthening ties. But Eutharic died before Theoderic, removing a key link. The Vandals in North Africa drifted under different leaders, other Germanic kingdoms shifted in alignment. Theoderic, once seen as a guarantor of stability, was now under pressure from both internal factions and external enmity. And then came the personal signs, omens, mood shifts, darkness in the king's spirit. Theoderic grew gloomy. He was said to suffer physically, the burdens of age, the pains of body, perhaps disease. He became suspicious of those he had once trusted. Legends say that toward the end, he was haunted by guilt over executing Roman nobles. The death of Pope John, sent to negotiate with Justin I over Arian persecution, added to the weight. On his return, the Pope died in prison, neglected. Rumors blamed Theoderic. Ravenna Turismo. There were also darker stories, legends that his guilt manifested in visions, in hauntings. In Ravenna, people whispered, did Theoderic see the faces of those he had condemned? Did he believe he was damned? Meanwhile, the machinery of his realm, the administrators, the senatorial class, grew uneasy. The delicate harmony he had built stretched thin. Goths pressed for more power, Romans feared marginalization. Religious divisions deepened. The king, knowing his own mortality, tried to grasp control. But every effort only seemed to widen the cracks. By 524 to 525, when he ordered the execution of Boethius and Symmachus, many saw that Theoderic was acting less like a ruler of peace, more like a king of paranoia. And in the summer of 526, with his health failing, the once invincible Theoderic lay down to die, though in those final days, so many questions would remain unanswered. Theoderic, for all his power, had begun to lose control. The great machine of governance he built turned jagged. Factions moved like shadows. Whispers grew louder. In 523, Theoderic's paranoia sharpened into action. A Roman senator named Albinus was accused of treason, of secret correspondence with Emperor Justin I in Constantinople. Theoderic, always vigilant over threats from the east, saw Albinus's alleged letters to Constantinople not just as political betrayal but as existential danger. Arian Goths and Orthodox Romans, already divided by faith, now divided by fear. When Boethius, the philosopher-senator, tried to defend Albinus, tried to shield him, perhaps out of justice, perhaps out of old loyalties, Theoderic saw an opportunity. Boethius was charged with treason. Not just political treason, but religious betrayal. The tension between his Catholic faith and Theoderic's Arianism made the charges all the more combustible. Boethius was imprisoned at Pavia. In those cold stones, he wrote his greatest work, The Consolation of Philosophy, a meditation in captivity, wrestling with betrayal, justice, even divine order. He composed it not in the comfort of court, but in the silence of despair. October 23, 524. Boethius is executed. Tortured, silenced. Philosophical dialogue gives way to cruelty. Some sources say his skull was crushed with a club, others say a rope was used, his death a horrifying spectacle. A great mind snuffed out, a symbol of what had gone wrong under Theoderic's reign. But the rot did not stop there. Boethius' father-in-law, Symmachus, also is implicated, persecuted soon after, dying under dire circumstances. Pope John I, who had been sent to Constantinople by Theoderic in an attempt to negotiate over the persecution of Arians, returns empty-handed. Theoderic suspects conspiracy. He imprisons Pope John. The frail pontiff dies in neglect and ill-treatment in Ravenna in May 526. Meanwhile, Theoderic's health was failing. Aged, pained, beset by illness. Some sources say he suffered from dysentery or a severe digestive affliction, others simply say a decrepitude that made his last days torturous. With every betrayal, every execution, every religious conflict, the king withdrew. In halls that once awed with mosaics and power, he lay more often alone. Nightmares haunted him, whether real or imagined. He who had built his rule on strength now feared whispers in corridors, letters behind curtains, conspiracies born of his own making. The court was full of tension. The Gothic warriors, proud and brutal, demanded clarity. The Roman senators, fearful, either kept their heads low or plotted to preserve what remained of their old offices. Amalasuntha, his daughter, watched, knowing that with no male heir alive, his death would leave a vacuum. Athalaric, his grandson, was young, barely a child. Could the kingdom survive the fractures? Was the empire of Goths and Romans built by Theoderic strong enough to outlast its founder? Legend says that in Theoderic's final winter, the king became more reclusive. He walked through the gardens of Ravenna at dusk, silent except for the hiss of wind in cypress trees. He stared at the starless sky. Sometimes, he would start in pain, clutching his belly. Other times, he would look at the mausoleum he had built for himself, his grand tomb in Ravenna, and wonder if death would be swift or tortured. In spring of 526, the tension between Theoderic and the Eastern Empire under Justin I continued to simmer. Justin's policies against Arianism, pressure from the Church, the resentment of Roman subjects, all were forming a perfect storm. By the summer, the dissension at court was palpable. Alliances among Gothic nobles frayed. Some envied Amalasuntha's intellect and her closeness to Roman culture, others hated it. Some wanted the harsh reprisals against Catholics, others feared Rome's collapse. Theoderic's own decrees grew more fearful, more desperate. Great men were punished more harshly. Mercy was a concept he once exploited for stability, now mercy seemed weak. And so, on August 30, 526, after what many chroniclers call 3 days of illness, Theoderic the Great died in Ravenna. He was 72 years old. The great king who blended worlds, Goths and Romans, pagan and Christian, barbarian and imperial, breathed his last. His legacy would not die with him, but the empire he built would face storms its founder avoided. August 30th, 526. Ravenna's streets were quiet, but in the palace there was chaos. Theoderic, king of the Ostrogoths, the man who had ruled Italy for more than 30 years, was dead. The people of Ravenna mourned, but beneath the grief was something sharper, fear. His body was carried with solemn procession to the great mausoleum he had built years before, a massive tomb of stone capped by a single monolithic roof, still standing in Ravenna today. He had imagined it as a statement of eternal power. Yet the whispers among the Romans and Goths told another story, that the mausoleum was not a palace of triumph, but a prison for a haunted soul. For legends say Theoderic's final days were cursed. One account claims that, as he lay dying, he imagined he saw a monstrous fish served at his table, its jaws gaping, its teeth bared. In terror, the king fled from the sight, crying out that the soul of a murdered pope, John I, had come to drag him into hell. And so, even as his body was interred in Ravenna, many believed his soul did not rest. Stories spread of Theoderic being hurled into Mount Etna's fiery crater, condemned to burn eternally in volcanic flames. To his enemies, this was justice. To his followers, it was slander. But to the common people, it was proof, the mighty king had not escaped judgment. With his death came uncertainty. His chosen heir was his grandson Athalaric, a boy of just 10 years old. Too young to rule, too fragile to lead warriors, too malleable to face enemies. And so, his mother Amalasuntha stepped forward as regent. She was educated in Roman tradition, fluent in Greek and Latin, a lover of classical philosophy. She admired Roman culture, far more than her Gothic nobles liked. For the Goths, this was weakness. For the Romans, it was hope. The regency began with suspicion. Amalasuntha attempted to continue her father's balancing act, but the balance was broken. Factions formed. Some Gothic nobles whispered that she was too Roman, betraying their warrior heritage. The Romans saw her as a possible protector against Gothic brutality, but also feared her unstable position. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire under Justin I, and soon Justinian, watched closely. Theoderic had kept Italy stable, if tense. Without him, Constantinople saw opportunity. Italy could be pried back into Roman hands. Theoderic's death was not just the end of a man, it was the breaking of the fragile pact that held two worlds together. Without him, old grudges resurfaced. Gothic pride clashed with Roman ambition. Religious differences sharpened into daggers. And in the dark halls of Ravenna, as Amalasuntha struggled to hold the reins, men who had once cowered before Theoderic now schemed openly. They remembered Boethius. They remembered Symmachus. They remembered Pope John. And they whispered that justice had not yet been served. Theoderic died. His tomb was built. But what rose in the aftermath was not just political chaos, it was a war over memory. Over what Theoderic was, what he did, and what people wanted him to represent. Amalasuntha tried to carry forward his policies of unity, Goths and Romans, Roman laws, Gothic tradition. Educated, well-versed in Latin, Greek, Gothic. Her court spheres included not just war and administration, but philosophy. Yet she was resented by many Goths who saw Roman culture as soft, as betrayal. By Romans, she was sometimes hoped for, sometimes feared. Her position was contradictory. Her every move was judged not only politically but morally, culturally. Her regency is remembered by some as enlightened, by others, as naive. Athalaric succeeded Theoderic as king, but he was child and weak. He indulged, says Procopius, in pleasure and feasting rather than firm governance. It tested Amalasuntha's ability to maintain control. As Athalaric died, in 534, the fragile edifice Theoderic built began to crumble faster. Amalasuntha made her cousin Theodahad co-king to satisfy Gothic custom and to appease nobles. But Theodahad was opportunistic. He betrayed Amalasuntha. He had her killed after holding her captive. This regicide ripened the justification Constantinople needed to invade Italy. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Roman Empire, Justinian I and Empress Theodora observed. To them, Theoderic's kingdom represented both threat and opportunity. The death of Amalasuntha gave them political casus belli. The Gothic War followed, a brutal, prolonged war that would devastate Italy. What Theoderic had built, stability, diplomacy, the merging of cultures, much of it was destroyed. Roads, cities, population, infrastructure decayed under the weight of war. But the idea of Theoderic survived. His memory took on mythical proportions. Gothic tradition later elevated him, in legends, songs, epic poetry, e.g. Northern Europe's Dietrich von Bern. He became larger than life, warrior king, king of Goths and Romans, even a mythic hero. Historians like Cassiodorus and Jordanes, and later chroniclers, preserved ambivalent images, sometimes tyrant, sometimes sage. There are moral paradoxes. Theoderic, though Arian, generally protected Orthodox Christians. He built public works, repaired aqueducts, maintained Roman administrative traditions, yet he also ordered executions of prominent Romans, Boethius, Symmachus, imprisoned Pope John I, fostered religious tension. His policy was integration, Roman culture under Gothic rule, but he never fully bridged the divide. When he died, the divisions he tolerated began to snap. So what is the truth? Was he a benevolent if flawed ruler, trying for a new order? Or a brutal paranoid king whose fear undid his legacy? Perhaps both. Centuries later, Renaissance humanists rediscovered Boethius, the philosopher Theoderic executed. His Consolation of Philosophy became one of the most influential works of the Middle Ages. Ironically, Theoderic's cruelty gave birth to a text that shaped Western thought for nearly 1,000 years. In the 19th century, Romantic nationalists resurrected Theoderic as a Germanic hero, erasing his brutality in favor of legend. His image shifted to suit political needs, hero to some, tyrant to others. Today, historians debate him with nuance. Was he a cruel despot or a pragmatic statesman? Was his downfall the inevitable result of trying to bridge two cultures, or the tragic collapse of one man's will under the weight of paranoia and age? His story is not just ancient history. It is a mirror. It warns us of leaders who begin with vision, who unify, who build, and then allow fear to devour them from within. It warns us of societies that fracture when identity and belief collide. It warns us that monuments and armies cannot outlive the consequences of fear, betrayal, and silence. In Ravenna, Theoderic's mausoleum still stands. Tourists pass by, snapping photos. They see only stone, not the screams of a dying king, not the betrayals that followed. They do not hear the legends that say his soul was hurled into Etna's fire. But if you stand in the shadow of his tomb, and listen long enough, some say you can still hear the sound of his restless soul clawing, raging, remembering. Theoderic the Great. King of the Ostrogoths. Builder, murderer, visionary, tyrant. A man who tried to forge a new Rome and instead left a haunted ruin. His final days remind us of one truth: no king, no empire, no monument escapes the judgment of time. You've seen what power does, what fear does, what silence does. If you leave without subscribing, that choice says something about you, that you prefer to look away, just like those who ignored the warnings of the past. Don't walk away in silence. Subscribe now. Or step into the comments and tell the world why you chose to bury history, rather than remember it.